Fox, watched the highway, and the cars never came back. By the time the last car passed, the fox had already woven the road into the map of its world. It had grown up with the sound of tires as a kind of distant weather. The forest where it was born did not touch the highway, but the noise carried through the trees like a river you could hear but not see. On still nights, when the wind lay down and the leaves stopped whispering, the fox could pick out each kind of engine. Heavy trucks that droned, light cars that hummed, motorcycles that scratched the air like thin metal claws. For the fox, the highway was not human engineering, not a project with a name and a number. It was simply part of the landscape, the way a cliff or a creek might be. It divided territory, offered scraps, and sometimes killed careless animals who did not understand how quickly that strip of stone could awaken. As a young kit, it had crouched at the edge of the trees and watched the lights. They fascinated it. Headlights sliding along the asphalt, red tail lamps shrinking toward the horizon, brief flashes of turn signals when drivers remembered to use them. The fox did not know what any of it meant. It only felt that the road was alive with movement and direction. Later, as it grew lean and quick and cautious, the fox learned the working rules of the place. Never cross in the bright wash of midday. Never trust a sudden gap in the traffic near a blind curve. Listen for the faint tremble in the ground that means a vehicle is still far away, but coming fast. Learn which ditches hold thrown food, which rest stops are safest at night, which stretches of shoulder always smell of spilled diesel. In those days, the highway called itself important. People came and went with urgency, as if every mile carried a promise. The little town called Miller's Fork sat beside it like a barnacle on a ship. There was a gas station with a tall sign that listed prices in red plastic numbers, a diner shaped like a squat metal rail car, and a motel where the room doors were painted the color of eggshells and the curtains rarely closed all the way. The fox saw all of it from the edges. It ate chicken bones and cold fries tossed from car windows. It watched people step out of their vehicles, stretch tired legs, and stand staring at the horizon as if the road might answer some question if they just looked long enough. Then, over a handful of seasons, things began to change. It started with machines. Surveyors came with bright vests and thin tripods, marking lines across fields that never used to hold anything but corn and weeds. A temporary office appeared in a gravel lot, then disappeared. Far off, beyond the farthest ridge the fox could see, a low hum of work drifted through the air on certain days, the clang and grind of something new being carved into the landscape. The fox did not understand blueprints or state budgets. It only noticed that the steady river of vehicles grew a little thinner with each passing year. The station changed its sign to advertise lower prices, then higher prices, then discounts that never seemed to end. The diner closed earlier at night. The motel replaced its cracked vacancy sign with a newer one that stayed lit more than it flickered. Then, one late summer, a ribbon of fresh concrete opened on the far side of the county. People did not call it a ribbon, of course. They called it the bypass, the new route, the faster way. It lay far enough from the old highway that the fox could not hear its traffic clearly, only a distant suggestion of noise. But the effect on the familiar road was immediate. Trucks that once roared past every hour now appeared only a few times each day. Long lines of vacation cars with bicycles on their roofs vanished almost overnight. The school bus that used to share the highway with commuters took a smaller road instead, as if embarrassed to be seen on a path that no longer mattered. The fox watched all this with the slow comprehension of an animal whose survival depends on noticing even small changes. There were fewer thrown wrappers in the ditches now, fewer forgotten sandwiches, fewer terrified rabbits frozen between beams of light. The night became quieter than it had ever been. Then came the day that felt different from all the others. The sky that morning was high and thin, the color of worn paper. The fox nosed through damp leaves near the tree line, searching for beetles, when a new sound rolled through the air. It was the kind of noise that felt thick and official, like the arrival of a storm. Down on the highway, 2 utility trucks and a county car parked in a neat line. Men in jackets stepped out. They walked to the big green sign at the edge of town, conferred for a moment, and then unbolted it from its posts. The fox watched as the metal rectangle that had once promised miles and exits was laid gently into the back of a truck, like a name being taken away. Other signs followed. The one that showed the distance to the next city. The one that cautioned about deer crossing. The fox did not know the words, but it understood the gesture. The road was being unmarked, stripped of the symbols that connected it to a wider world. By the time autumn came, the change was complete. The new bypass had taken nearly all the traffic, and the old route through Miller's Fork had become a kind of accidental country lane, stretched more than it needed to be, wider than any of its remaining users required. The fox tested this new quiet carefully. At first, it crossed only during the darkest hours, out of old habit. Later, emboldened by the empty stretches, it walked along the shoulder in daylight, nose raised to the wind. On some days there were no vehicles at all. The little town adapted as best it could. The gas station reduced its hours, then closed on some weekdays altogether. The diner changed from being a stop on the way to somewhere to being a place where the remaining locals gathered because there was nowhere else. The motel, never exactly thriving, patched its roof with mismatched shingles and stopped replacing the faded curtains. And up above the road, half a mile from the town, stood an overpass that had once carried a minor farm road over the highway. The bridge was not large or graceful. It was a practical span of concrete and steel with a metal guardrail along each side. Beneath it, a hollow of earth stayed dry even during the hardest rains. Birds nested in the crooks of its beams. Kids from town had once painted their names there in sloppy loops of spray paint, but time and sun had chewed at the letters until they were ghosts of words. The fox discovered this place by accident on a freezing rain day. The storm had driven it off the open fields, seeking cover. It slipped under the bridge and found shelter, a ceiling of stone that did not drip, and a wall of dry, dusty smell that felt ancient. For the first time, the fox slept less than 20 paces from the highway without feeling threatened by it. That winter, it dug a den at the base of one of the bridge supports. The ground there was packed and stubborn, full of stones, but the fox was patient. Day after day it worked at the entrance, widening it, shaping it until it fit its body. When snow fell and turned the world above into a white glare, the den stayed dark and snug. From that season onward, the highway and the den became a pair of facts in the fox's life. The animal hunted in the surrounding fields and woods, trodden in loose circles, but it always returned to the hollow beneath the bridge. The road, even in its quieter state, offered a strange comfort. It was stable, predictable. A line in the landscape that never shifted, even as the forest slowly changed. The fox learned the new rhythms. Farm trucks rattled by around dawn, carrying hay or tools. A mail carrier in a boxy vehicle passed at almost the same time each weekday, windshield wipers squeaking when it rained. A school bus clattered on weekdays during the darker months. A few battered cars belonging to locals came and went without much ceremony. Now and then, a traveler would slip off the bypass by mistake, following an outdated map or a stubborn navigation device. They would slow as they reached the dead town, baffled by the sight of a gas station with its pumps wrapped in plastic and a diner with chairs stacked on tables inside. Some turned around at once. Others stopped for a moment on the shoulder, staring. To the fox, these human dramas were background noise. What mattered was that the gaps between vehicles grew larger, and the times when the asphalt lay completely still grew longer. Soon, a habit took shape. Near the end of each day, when the light slid from bright to soft and the first chill crept up from the fields, the fox climbed the slope from its den to the guardrail. It placed its paws on the cold metal and looked along the highway in both directions. The view from there was simple but wide. The road ran straight for a long distance, a thin ribbon of gray framed by pale grass. Beyond it, the land rose and fell gently, with low wooded hills on either side. At the farthest visible point, the highway narrowed into a point and disappeared between the trees. The fox always stared toward that distant notch in the hills. That was where traffic used to appear in pairs of light. Twin beams would separate from the darkness, grow brighter as the vehicle approached, then split and sweep past, leaving the fox briefly blinded. Now, evening after evening, nothing came. If a car did arrive, the fox heard it long before it saw it. The faint rumble of an engine echoed under the bridge, rose through the metal, and reached its paws. That vibration was enough warning for the fox to slip back down the slope, melt into the shadows, and let the machine pass without being seen. On many days, though, no such warning came. The valley sank into dusk, the air filled with the simple noises of insects, and the highway remained blank. The fox did not know the word nostalgia, but it felt the thing itself. It sensed that the road had been built to move, and now it did not. It understood that something used to surge along this strip of stone and was missing, like a scent that once hung everywhere but now only lingered in faint traces. Time, for humans, is measured in marked pages and screens, in calendar dates and obligations. For the fox, it was a matter of seasons and bodies. It grew thicker fur, then shed it. Its teeth dulled slightly. Its muscles learned new paths through the terrain. It learned which farms left chickens unattended, which fields grew corn that dropped ears close to the fence, which orchard was now almost entirely abandoned. Through all these cycles, the highway remained the same distance from the den, the same stretch of straight line. It cracked here and there. A patch of asphalt buckled during a hot summer. Milkweed burst from the seams, pods opening into clouds of silk. But the general shape held. In the town, change was harsher. The gas station shut for good one spring. The pumps were removed, leaving bare rectangles of stained concrete. The sign that had once displayed prices now stood blank, its frame rattling in the wind. The diner followed a little while later. The motel limped on longest, hosting hunters in the fall and the occasional construction crew in off months. But eventually its windows went dark as well, and a handwritten note appeared on its office door announcing that it was closed until further notice. The notice weathered. The ink ran, the paper curled. No one took it down or replaced it. There were people who had spent their entire working lives tied to the pulse of the highway. Among them was a man named Earl. Earl had started at the gas station when he was barely more than a boy. He had pumped fuel back when it was still common to do that for customers, wiping windshields with a rag, offering directions. Later, he had learned to work the diner griddle, sliding eggs and pancakes onto plates without looking. For most of his life, he measured his days in rushes. The early morning commuters, the mid-afternoon truckers, the slow parade of summer travelers with children pressing faces to windows. He had married a woman named Linda, who liked to decorate the diner counter with jars of wildflowers. Their only child, a daughter, left for college and did not return except for brief visits. Earl told himself that was good. Small towns did not always give young people fair odds. He and Linda stayed. They joked with regulars, hollered orders back to the kitchen, watched the changing models of cars as years rolled past. When the talk of the bypass began, they told each other it would not make such a difference. People would still need gas. People would still have to eat. In the end, they were wrong. By the time the new road opened, Linda was already ill. The disease that carried her away moved slowly, but it moved in only one direction. For a while, she insisted on working despite the fatigue, gripping the edge of the counter when waves of dizziness came. Later, she sat at a corner booth, wrapped in a shawl, sipping tea and offering smiles to those who came in. Earl kept the station and the diner open as long as numbers allowed. He cut hours, deferred repairs, learned to do more with less. After Linda died, the sound of the empty booths became heavier than he could bear. He closed the doors for good on a day when gray clouds pressed low over the town. He tried honest retirement for a while, fishing, sitting on the porch, chatting with neighbors about weather and crops. But his body had been trained for movement, for the rhythm of a working day. Idleness made his joints ache more than any effort. So, after a time, he found himself returning to the highway. At first, he drove it only from habit, taking his old pickup along the familiar stretch to make sure nothing strange had happened there. Later, he parked at the ruined station and walked the shoulder. He picked up trash because no one else did, though there was less of it each year. He checked the doors of the closed buildings, not expecting trouble, but wanting to be certain. Towns grow new roles for their people when old ones vanish, but sometimes the role is simple and unacknowledged. Without ever deciding to, Earl became the watcher of the road. He knew where cracks were deepening, where water pooled after hard rain, where the guardrail had been bent long ago by a careless driver and never straightened. He knew when a family of raccoons had moved into the culvert near mile marker 3, and when they moved on. He knew which old oak tree near the ditch had finally toppled in a windstorm. From the bridge where the fox lived, his truck was a minor disturbance. The fox learned its engine note as distinct from the others. It recognized the steady way Earl drove, never fast, never weaving. It learned that the truck rarely came near dusk. Earl preferred late morning and afternoon visits, times when the shadows were not yet long and his thoughts felt less heavy. One autumn afternoon, when leaves had dropped but winter had not fully arrived, Earl's truck coughed to a stop near the overpass. The fox heard the sputter and click of the cooling engine. It climbed the slope, peered over the guardrail, and saw Earl standing with his hands on his hips, staring at the stretch of road as though reading something written nowhere. The man looked thinner than before. Grief had carved deeper lines in his face. Still he moved with a kind of stubbornness, the way an old fence post holds itself upright even as the soil erodes. He walked slowly toward the center of the highway, boots scuffing the faded yellow line. The fox watched him from above, head low, ears forward. There was something about this deliberate pacing that felt different from his usual inspections. At the midpoint of the straightaway, Earl stopped. He stood there in the quiet, the only human figure in sight, with the road stretching out on either side, like two long, patient sentences that no longer led anywhere in particular. He reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and took out a small object. From the bridge, the fox could not see what it was. Earl turned it over in his hand, thumb stroking its surface. Then he walked to the base of the overpass. The fox slipped back, unseen, and retreated a little way into its den. It watched as the man climbed the embankment, using the same rough path the fox had worn over the months. At the entrance to the hollow beneath the bridge, he paused. The air there was cooler, shaded from the sun. Earl crouched, knees popping softly, and pressed the object into a crack in the concrete support. It was a photograph, one from long ago, showing Linda standing in front of the old diner with a tray in her hands and a half smile on her face. The edges had softened with age, the colors had bled. He wedged it into the stone as carefully as if he were placing something fragile in a hidden shrine. Earl did not say anything out loud. Words had grown slippery for him in recent years, failing to hold what he felt. This simple act seemed clearer than any speech. He stayed there for some time, one hand resting against the concrete, before he rose and made his way back to the truck. The fox listened to the fading rumble of the engine as Earl drove away, then crept forward to sniff the crack in the wall. The scent of the man was there, stronger than usual, braided with the dry paper smell of the photograph and the faint dust of the concrete. There was also another note, almost gone, but still present. A trace of the diner, the ghosts of coffee and fried onions, and the countless voices that had passed through that place when it was the beating heart of the road. The fox did not understand the meaning of the paper square. It only sensed that the hollow beneath the bridge had become crowded with the presence of something new, something strange and human that would not rot in the same way fallen leaves did. That night, a storm rolled in from the hills. Heavy clouds moved over the valley, thick and dark. The air grew heavy with a metallic taste that precedes rain. Wind pushed along the highway, making long grasses bend like waves. The fox felt the shift and retreated early to its den, curling in the deeper tunnel. When the first drops fell, they struck the asphalt with a sound like tiny distant drums. Then the sky opened. Rain hammered the bridge, the road, the fields. It filled every dip, carved rivulets down the embankments, rattled against the guardrails. Old oil and dust rose from the highway in a blended smell that was both sour and oddly clean, like the inside of a machine being scrubbed. The fox watched from the mouth of its den as water flowed down the slope in dark stripes. Beneath the bridge, a thin curtain of runoff cascaded in front of the crack where Earl had hidden the photograph, but the little hollow itself stayed dry. The concrete walls shivered with each thunderclap. For hours, the storm worked on the land. It scoured the road of accumulated grit, pushed debris to the sides, rinsed tire marks that had lingered for years. It rattled the loose signposts and shook loose one rusted bolt from the guardrail. When the rain finally eased, night had deepened. Puddles lay in the shallow places of the highway, mirrors reflecting scattered stars between scudding clouds. Mist began to rise from the soaked ground, pale and slow. The fox emerged fully and climbed once more to the top of the embankment. The world smelled new. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil, crushed plants, and washed stone. The highway, which had looked dry and tired for so long, now glistened under the faint light, its cracks filled temporarily with water that caught the sky. Standing at the guardrail, the fox felt as if it were looking at a different version of the road, one that had been revealed by the storm. For the first time, it walked out onto the wet asphalt at the center of the straight stretch. Its paws made no sound on the slick surface. It followed the yellow line a short distance, turning its head slowly, testing the feel of this space with each step. Somewhere in the dark woods, a tree frog called, echoed by another. An owl passed overhead, wings silent, hunting in the fresh quiet that follows heavy rain. The fox stopped near the midpoint, close to where Earl had stood earlier that day. It sniffed the air and caught a faint hint of the man's scent still lingering, washed thin but not gone. Beneath that, it sensed the deeper, older smell of the road itself, a mixture of stone, tar, and countless journeys now suspended. For reasons it could not have named, the fox sat down on the line and faced the distant notch in the hills. No headlights appeared. The bypass hummed faintly somewhere far away, but this stretch remained empty. The fox waited, not because it expected anything, but because the habit had soaked so deeply into its bones that to do otherwise felt wrong. Time slipped in gentle layers. The clouds thinned and pulled away, revealing more stars. The mist along the ditches turned silver. A breeze moved through the weeds, carrying the new green smell of plants that had just been given the water they needed to keep growing. Eventually the fox rose and returned to the shelter of the bridge. It passed close to the crack in the concrete, where the photograph hid and brushed it with its tail without noticing. In the weeks that followed, small changes crept into the landscape. Grass grew taller at the edges of the asphalt, emboldened by the lack of tires. Wildflowers claimed the strip of gravel near the shoulder. Saplings appeared in the shallow soil by the guardrails, their roots probing for patience more than for depth. Animals learned that danger here had lessened. A family of deer began crossing the highway in broad daylight, pausing to nibble at the new shoots that sprouted between the cracks. Raccoons waddled along the ditch line unhurried. Crows strutted on the warm surface in early morning, picking insects from the roadside carcasses that still appeared now and then when a fast driver from the bypass took the wrong exit. The fox shared this new ease, but never completely relaxed. It kept its evening appointment with the guardrail as faithfully as if some unseen bell rang to call it. It watched the notch in the hills, listened for any stray engine, and measured the gaps of silence. Sometimes the silence felt heavy. Sometimes it felt like a gift. On rare days, a vehicle from far away still strayed onto the old highway. A family in a rental car seeking a scenic route. A caravan of classic automobiles on a nostalgic tour. A lost truck following a stubborn navigation device. When that happened, the fox dropped low and let them pass, noting their scents, cataloging them as temporary ghosts. It was on one such day, late in the following spring, that a new shape appeared. The sun was lowering, but the sky remained bright, brushed with thin clouds. The air held the clean taste that comes after rain has rinsed out most of the dust. The fox stood at its usual place on the guardrail, eyes on the horizon. At first, it heard only a faint murmur, almost like distant wind. Then the murmur grew into a rough, uneven engine note. It were not the sound of the heavy trucks from the old days, nor the smooth purr of a modern car. It was something older, with a cough in it. The fox's muscles tightened. Part of it wanted to retreat. Another part held it in place, curiosity stronger than fear. A pair of dim headlights appeared between the trees, rocking slightly as the vehicle moved over imperfect pavement. As it drew closer, the fox recognized the faded blue pickup that Earl always drove. The truck slowed as it approached the straight stretch near the bridge. Instead of continuing at a steady pace, Earl guided it onto the shoulder and let it roll to a stop. The engine shuddered, then stilled. He sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. Then he opened the door and stepped down onto the gravel. From its high perch, the fox watched him walk out to the center of the road once more. He moved more slowly than before. Age and loss had pressed deeper into him, but there was a set to his jaw that said this visit had a specific purpose. He looked up at the overpass, at the empty space above the guardrail where no sign or banner hung, and for a heartbeat, his gaze passed directly over the fox. The animal remained as still as stone. Earl's eyes did not linger. He faced down the length of the highway, toward the town and the life he had known there, then turned to look in the opposite direction, toward the hills and the bypass and everything that had replaced his world. He took off his hat and pressed it against his chest. In his mind, he spoke to Linda, though his lips did not move. He told her that the road had finally finished whatever story it was telling. The stream of travelers she used to watch would not return, not in the way they had been. The place where they had worked and laughed and sweated had moved a little further into the past. But as he stood there, he felt something else as well. The highway had not died. It had changed owners. It belonged now to whatever lived in the grasses and ditches and woods. It belonged to the fox he half imagined up there on the bridge, to the deer that crossed without fear, to the crows that rode surges of warm air above the pavement. That thought, unexpectedly, did not make him sad. He put his hat back on, nodded once to the empty air as if answering a question that no one had asked, and returned to the truck. The engine resisted a little before catching. He guided the vehicle down the road, passed beneath the bridge, and continued until he merged again with the newer route, where the unbroken stream of headlights swallowed him. The fox watched until the last red glimmer of his taillights vanished in a bend. Then it looked back down at the road below the bridge. The surface was drying. Dark patches left by the storm shrank in the evening breeze. In the distance, crows settled onto the fence posts like musical notes on a line. The world seemed to exhale. The fox did something it had never done before. It descended the slope not toward the safety of its den, but toward the middle of the highway. It stepped onto the yellow line, turned slowly in a full circle, and sat facing the direction from which the truck had come. In its animal way, it understood that some chapter of the road's life had just ended with that visit. Whatever remained would be quieter, more rooted, more like the deep forest than the roaring metal river it had once been. The fox stayed there as the light faded, a small bright shape on the broad, empty surface. To a human watcher, it might have looked like a sentry. To other animals, it was simply another creature claiming space. Eventually, as the first true darkness settled and the crickets wound up their steady song, the fox rose and trotted off the asphalt. It slipped under the guardrail, passed beneath the bridge, and curled in its den near the concrete wall where the photograph slept. The highway lay above like a memory. It would crack and crumble over many seasons. Vines would climb its supports. Trees would grow tall enough that their branches arched over the old lanes and touched. People might forget that their parents once drove this way, that there had been a station, a diner, a motel, a man who filled cups and wiped countertops and loved a woman who watched taillights like lines in a book. But the fox, in its narrower span of years, would remember in the only way it could. It would return to the guardrail and watch the horizon, even when no engines came. It would track the slow return of grass and flowers, the new paths deer carved, the places where rabbits liked to pause and listen. On some nights when the wind carried just the right echoes from the faraway bypass, the fox might tilt its head, hearing a faint ghost of the old river of traffic. It would not know exactly what that meant. It would only feel the way the ground once again hummed a little under its paws, and it would settle on the rail as if answering an old call. In that quiet, open stretch of land, the story of the highway would continue, but in a different language. No longer told in miles and engines, but in paw prints, wing beats, and the steady, patient watching of a small red animal that refused to abandon its post on the edge of the empty road.